So do you like the new place? I feel like I got a pretty good deal.
Well, a few notes. There's a lot of cages.
Yes, there are several cages.
And
they didn't cost a penny extra.
well, that's good. Do you want to explain the room with the camera?
Well, I'm a filmmaker, so a free camera room was a huge benefit.
I suppose so. It's really dark down here, though.
But the acoustics are exquisite.
I can't argue with that. Why is there a staircase going down into blackness?
Well, I mean, what, is it going to get brighter the deeper into Earth you go? You sound crazy right now.
Maybe a little bit.
But let's change the subject. Tonight we're going to talk about Barbarian.
Oh, good. A scary movie for a change.
Yeah, and it's completely unrelated to this. So why don't you take off your shoes, get comfortable, and let's see, what time is it? Yeah, in about 15 minutes there'll be a breastfeeding.
This podcast is about why horror scares us. What deep, dark, secret, scary cinema shines a light on. The discussions are frank and involve conversations about abuse, trauma, and mental health. There are also spoilers, so keep that in mind too. Now, sharpen your machetes and straight razors, because this is Cutting Deep into Horror.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Cutting Deep into Horror. I'm, of course, Enrique Couto, your main maniac, I suppose. And I'm here once again with my good friend and horror movie lover who is still getting her education. You're like a... what's that called when you're in college and you're an undergrad?
Yeah.
You're an undergrad, so you're like getting ready to start your master's.
Yeah, not quite there yet.
Not there, but you'll be there in no time flat.
Especially with your help, yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to brag, but Rachel Rodolfi here with me today. So,
hi guys.
And this one that we're going to be talking about tonight, whatever, is the film from 2022, Barbarian, and this was one you wanted to talk about. I mean, obviously I liked the film because I took you to see it in the theater, and not only did I take you to see it, but it was my second time seeing it in the theater. I walked out of Barbarian and was like, "Aw, man, I have to share this."
Yeah.
ASAP.
Yeah, I think it was, 2 or 3 days later you dragged me to the theater?
Yeah, it was like that following Monday or something like that. I mean, we still go to the movies on Mondays mostly, so... And yeah, I just had to show it to you. So for those who don't know, Barbarian, which came out in theaters in 2022, it's a horror film and thriller written and directed by Zach Cregger. And this is his first time writing and directing all by himself. He had been a co-writer and maybe a co-director. I'll double check that in a second. But so this film, I mean, really, it sets the tone for quite a career for Zach, I have to say. But the trailers, did you see the trailers? Did you see the marketing stuff or no?
I did see some of the trailers, and that's why when you took me to see it, and we'll get more into this, but the movie does a really good job of just totally misleading you, and I think part of that had to do with the marketing, because it gave you the sense that it was going to be really more of like a trapped in a house with like a normal, average, everyday serial killer.
Well, the marketing misleads you as much as the film itself does.
Yeah. So we went in and I had absolutely no expectations, and my expectations were completely the wrong expectations.
Sure, definitely.
And that's what really caught my imagination with this, is I feel like the director did such a good job of not telling you what the movie was about until it's got its hooks in you.
I would definitely agree. The trailers made it look like girl meets boy through odd circumstances involving an Airbnb mishap, an app mishap, a mishap, if you will.
And we will.
Yeah, we will. You spend way too much time around me. But anyway, so that's what the film kind of comes off as. And of course, the fact that they cast what's his name? The Skarsgård, one of the Skarsgårds. There's like 50 of them.
Yeah, there's how many are there?
I don't know anymore. But this one's Bill Skarsgård.
Okay.
And he was, now is most famous for playing Pennywise the Dancing Clown in It, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2.
Mm-hmm.
So the moment you see Skarsgård, well, first, all the Skarsgårds look like they're like politely waiting to kill you.
Yeah, but politely.
Oh, no. I mean, they'll wait their turn or whatever. They're like, oh, I'm sorry, you haven't finished eating, please.
Yeah.
And then they're just holding their machete, watching you eat, They're very polite murderers. But no. So with him being the guy at the house and the way that the trailer makes it look, it makes it seem like something nefarious is going on. But it also gives this vibe that it's going to be unexpected. Like you're going to get something you're not expecting. So my first instinct watching the trailer, and I saw it a good 5 or 10 times because the film was pushed back from release a few times, which means that as me, an avid theater goer, I saw the trailer again and again and again. And it's important to remember that when you see movies, horror movies or whatever, you're going to see trailers for horror movies. It's just good marketing.
Yeah.
These are the people who would want to see Barbarian. So show them the Barbarian trailer. So with that all in mind, that's kind of, to me, I thought that maybe the big twist would be that Skarsgård was the victim and that this unassuming woman was going to be the perpetrator. That was kind of what I thought.
Yeah.
But then they put shots in the trailer that out of context really confuse you, like the caves.
Yeah.
And then they had, if I remember correctly, in one of the trailers, they had the woman like going through a cave, and then they showed the house in the 1960s era, where all the colors were super bright and stuff. And I remember thinking, like, is there a portal or something? Like,
did they go back in time?
Is this going to be a time bender? Like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
So they definitely made it in a good way. They really kept you from forming too many expectations. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good idea. But also it's a good idea when you have a movie that's really gripping.
Yes.
Because I went to see Barbarian and most of my friends weren't even that curious. But the film got phenomenal word of mouth.
Yeah.
And that's what made it a theatrical success. And not necessarily a giant theatrical success either. Like, let me see. No, it was a giant theatrical success. Never mind. Well, the budget was only $4 to $4.5 million, which is more than I got on me. But it made $45 million in the box office.
Oh, that is a very good success. Yeah.
That's a very good success. But to give context, like Renfield came out this year in 2023. It was a $45 million budget. It did $16 million in the theater.
Ouch.
So not only did it bomb, but if they could have culled it down to the price of a, lower tier Blumhouse movie, it could have been a success.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it wasn't because it was so expensive. And now we have The Last Voyage of the Demeter out now. I haven't seen it yet, but I'll be going this week to see it. And if it's awesome, I'll take you to see it.
I'd love that.
But it looks awesome. It's a movie about the boat that brings Dracula to where the events of Dracula happen.
Yeah.
That looks awesome.
Dracula prequel.
Yeah, except I guess in the book there actually is a lot on the Demeter. It's just that in the most famous movie versions, we never got that.
Exactly.
And it's produced and distributed by Universal, the home of Dracula, the home of the Wolfman, the home of Frankenstein. But so was Renfield. It's a Dracula movie. You see where I'm going?
Yeah.
Last Voyage of the Demeter cost about, I think they said $35 million, or $40 million. And I think last I checked opening weekend, it did 7.
Ouch.
And all I can think is, really, and I'll get off this topic in a second, but for those who don't know, I mean, my business is movies. Some people who listen to this podcast don't realize that that's my day job. Mm-hmm. I work in film, now low budget film, but film nonetheless. And watch The Purge 2, Anarchy, I think is what that one was. Watch that film. That film cost $12 million. It's a huge movie. Really entertaining, action-packed, tons of effects, tons of thrills. Did super well. Why can't a movie about Dracula that doesn't even leave a goddamn boat be $10 million so that it can have a chance to be a success?
I mean, that is... Do you want to take it up with the studio execs, or?
Well, it is their goddamn fault.
Well, no, I absolutely agree.
Every time somebody makes a huge move in the business, in the industry, and this does actually tie back into what the conversation's about, but every time somebody does something incredible, quote unquote, reinventing the wheel, like Jason Blum at Blumhouse did. For those who don't know, I mean, they started with Paranormal Activity, then all those sequels, then The Purge, then there was, they didn't do The Conjuring, but they did Insidious, I believe, and a ton of these films, so many franchises. Then they relaunched Halloween and Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends, and I love those. But they kept them relatively cheap. Even Halloween Ends and stuff, I think they didn't spend $40 million.
Which is surprising because that was such a big deal.
And they were huge hits. All of them made a lot of money. But they were like, let's be easy on this. Because like when they did The Purge, I believe the first Purge movie cost like $7 million. And then they capped off at like 14 and never really went up ever again. Yeah. And I was like, that's how you do it. But my point is, whenever people are like, wow, like Blumhouse is reinventing the wheel, or wow, like this studio is reinventing the wheel, all they're doing is being fiscally responsible to reinvent the wheel. The story's always the same. So then they made a movie for very little money, and it made a bunch of money.
It's almost like being very conservative with your money ends up being a good move in the long run.
It's almost like in a land of the blind, the man with one eye can release a film that will do well. You know, that's really because like Sony has done a lot of movies that are very similar and Blumhousey, like they're high concept movies, and most of them bomb, but they also cost like $20-30 million. Well, what do you expect?
Yeah,
like you're competing with companies that'll release a movie, and if it makes $30 million, they won.
Yeah, and
then you're like, okay, well, we're gonna start losing. And see what happens. My point really is just that Hollywood is so unbelievably fiscally irresponsible. It's kind of like when I went into this business full time and I was working commercials, I couldn't believe how much of the battle was being on time and sober.
Those are two very difficult things to do, especially at once.
That's true. My buddy George, George Robb, he has a podcast, Geologic Podcast. He's a musician. He's a gig drummer. He plays for a funk band and stuff. And when he went full time as a drummer, he told me, he was like, I could not believe how I would never not be hired that when I showed up my first time sober and on time. That was all it took. And I was like, and he was like, man, other drummers, they set that bar low. So anyway, but to my point to get to all of that, to my main point to all of this is, so now we have Barbarian made in I can't remember exactly when they filmed it. I'll look that up in a second, but I believe it was filmed pre-pandemic and then it was held over.
Okay. That would make sense.
Which would make sense because, a lot of stuff had to be held over for the sake of the product, the production, so that people would actually get to watch it. So, but it was produced by Regency Enterprises, Almost Never Films, Hammerstone Studios, a bunch of the smaller companies, and distributed by 20th Century Studios. Disney.
Oh.
I mean, that's an imprint of Disney, but Disney nonetheless.
So that technically means that she is a Disney princess.
That's absolutely what it means. But my point being that movie was a huge success and it cost like $5 million. And it made $45 million. Now I'm not a math scientist. I am not a math surgeon, but that's a good return. And the secret sauce is you risk more creatively and less financially. And that's what I'm trying to get to is that's why I'm not going to consider this tirade completely off course because that's what Barbarian did and did well.
Yes.
It was highly creative, highly imaginative, extremely interesting, never boring, and truly disturbing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to mention Zach Kreger has done some other stuff. He's been an actor in a lot of films. And he wrote in television a lot, including being an associate producer on The Lounge, Uncle Morty's Dub Shack, The McCarthys, Wrecked, Adam Ruins Everything, but I won't hold that against him. And as a filmmaker, he was the co-director on Miss March, which I think I saw. It was like a raunchy comedy. The Civil War on Drugs, Barbarian, and now the upcoming Weapons, which I haven't heard anything about yet, but I'm positive he has a big movie coming because this success is so massive. So now that I've made so much ado, and he was a member of the comedy troupe, The Whitest Kids You Know.
Really? Oh man, they were fun.
Yeah, I lived in New York at the time, and they used to hit on a girl I was dating, and so I don't like them.
Oh, sorry about you.
No, it's not that big a deal. I mean, But anyway, so my point is, we've got Barbarian, and if you've not watched Barbarian, the opening of the show warns you that we spoil.
Yep, a lot. In fact, all of it. We spoil all of it.
As best we can. We spoil all of it all day long, every day.
Yeah.
So Barbarian is a film about a young woman who is going to her Airbnb in Detroit, Michigan. And for those who don't know, Detroit is a rough town.
Yeah.
It's
I'd say so.
high crime rate, but also high unemployment rate, high poverty rate. There are lots of homes sitting completely empty and dilapidated in Detroit.
Yeah.
And she gets there in the middle of the night, and it's pouring rain, of course, because why wouldn't it? And we've been here, you and I.
Yeah.
We had an Airbnb. Actually, the opening scene of the film reminds me completely of that experience when we went to the Joe Bob Jamboree, right?
Yes.
So why don't you tell a little bit of it? I've been talking a lot.
Okay, so we went to the Joe Bob Jamboree out in Pennsylvania.
Mahoning, Pennsylvania, outside of Lehighton.
Exactly. And so we went to the Jamboree at the Mahoning Drive-In first, which was its own magical experience that I'm sure we'll eventually get a chance to talk about.
Oh, God, yeah.
Absolutely. A screen so big you can see it from 2 miles away. Just let that sink in.
A 1,000 car capacity drive-in. And we could see the screen from the Walmart parking lot on top of a hill 2 miles away. It was amazing.
So, obviously we go, we have fun, meet a whole bunch of other drive-in mutants, and we make some friends. And that's when at the end of the night, we're like, okay, we need to go check in on our Airbnb.
We were being fancy. You can camp at the Mahoning, but we drove 8.5 hours. I mean, you drove, I rode. Thank you again for doing that, because usually I'm always the driver. But we drove 8.5 hours there. We didn't want to camp in our car. We wanted to stay at a
feel
hotel.
Vaguely human by the end of it all.
But it's the middle of nowhere. And it's right next to Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, which is where all the not conventions, but concerts and big venue things are. So the closest hotel that isn't the Mahoning Inn, which is a piece of shit. So I've stayed there 3 times. Every time filthy. Every time I complained, every time they said, well, this is the first complaint we've ever had about it being dirty in there.
And you're like, oh, really? Since the last time that I complained?
No, I just assumed I was crazy. I'm really susceptible to gaslighting, apparently. But so the nearest traditional hotel otherwise is over half an hour away. And the drive-in festivities end at like 3 a.m.
Yeah.
We
don't want to drive anymore.
Yeah, you don't want to drive any further than you have to. So we got an Airbnb in a little house in a, not like a rough neighborhood, but definitely a downturned neighborhood. A neighborhood with not a lot of houses in good shape. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, quite a few of them. There was like boards in the windows, or it looked like...
Not where we were staying, but the houses nearby.
But nearby.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of what especially makes the opening scene so... resonate so well with both of us, is because it was very similar. Luckily for us, it was not pouring down rain, but I do believe that it was misting.
It was, yeah. And what made me think of our situation was her sitting there with the phone trying to read the instructions to get in, because I remember us doing that. And
we're like, we can't get this goddamn lockbox open. Like, how, what do we have to do?
Yeah.
And we're like, we just want to go lay down, please.
Yeah. All we paid for a room with a bed and a toilet somewhere.
And that's all we want.
Yeah, which, I mean, that's
and we didn't even get any of that.
Well, and we got into the house, and luckily it wasn't as creepy as the film, obviously. I mean, we're still here.
We're here.
Yeah, and we're talking about it with laughter in our, hearts.
And not terror.
No. But it was a house that was completely just Airbnb'd out. Mm-hmm. Every room had its own lock with its own code to get in and out. And every room was being rented out to somebody for a stay or whatever.
Oddly enough, a lot of them were mutants.
Yes, a decent amount. So, but it was an awful place. It was horribly maintained. The property owners were not even there. They had a person who was staying there for free in exchange for being like our superintendent, basically. Mm-hmm. It was friggin'... Anyway, but that's what makes it connect so much. So she's there punching the code in for a little key lock box. It's a little box with buttons on it. It opens up and there's a key in it. The code, she's having trouble with the code because, like a lot of people who use Airbnb and stuff, you're not used to that.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like we're all real estate agents with perfectly bleached teeth who just know how to punch those numbers in and get the key. No. We're average, everyday people.
We're just schlubs.
Schlubs, schlepping our way through town, needing a place to rest our unwashed heads. And she tries to get in, and when she finally gets the lockbox open, there's no key inside.
Mm-hmm.
So then she calls, no answer. She gets the machine for the property management company. So she rings the doorbell because she notices a light on, I think it was. And Bill Skarsgård opens the door, and he's grouchy, which I loved.
Yeah.
That he's grouchy. Like when she goes there, because you're immediately creeping out about him because it's like lone woman,
strange
nervous.
man.
And they realize that they double booked the room. She booked it on Airbnb. He booked it on some other service that may or may not be real. It wasn't Verbo or anything. And they both have the confirmations. Now, I love that he's so standoffish because she just woke him up.
Yeah.
He was asleep.
Yeah.
And clearly he had a long day.
And he even says, like, because she mentions, like, why are you so grouchy, essentially? And he even says, like, you've got to think about this from my point of view. Like, I booked this place. I got here. I was asleep and you woke me up. Like, please forgive me for being short, but this is just not ideal for either of us.
And I love that when she knocks on the door, he opens it. And he's like, what? She's like, who are you? And he's like, who are you? Am I? Who are you? And I was like, yeah, that's what I would say if somebody was knocking on my door, you know, but that made me want to like do an experiment where you knock on people's homes and then go, who are you? And they're like, But we'll be right back after a quick break with even more about Barbarian and even less about the independent film business right after this. And we are back right here on Cutting Deep into Horror, talking about Barbarian. And at this point, while we were watching the film, we've been introduced to Bill Skarsgård, and he's meeting our lady lead, whose name is Tess. I remember because he thought her name was beautiful. And I would love to hear some of your thoughts on this scenario, because they're sitting there talking, and eventually he says, well, why don't you just come in because it's pouring rain. And there's no hotels in Detroit. There's some kind of a medical convention. I've actually had that happen where I've been in a place where there was nowhere else to stay because I did not know that like the entire NFL is in town or something.
Yeah, for some reason.
No, for real. And I just want to get this out of the way really quick. The next Joe Bob Jamboree I went to all by myself, I stayed at a hotel I stayed at a different hotel than the one I was supposed to because I booked an affordable place. And it was in the roughest area ever. And I remember thinking, like, should I leave? And then I literally watched somebody buy heroin, like, from my window of my room.
I remember you telling me
and I was like,
that.
all right, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And I just was like, screw it. I'll just put a nice hotel on the Discover card.
Yeah.
And live with it later.
Because you were literally texting me as it happened, because you were saying like, oh, I maybe I'll just tough it out. And then you're like, I just watched a drug deal. I feel like I'm in my old childhood hood.
Yeah.
I should get out of here before I get shot.
I know what those places are like. That's all I'm saying. So, yeah. But no, so with that all being said, I want to also mention when Tess arrives, she looks around and basically everything is dark. Like there's no lights in the entire neighborhood except for this house. Mm-hmm. Now she heads inside because Skarsgård, his character Keith, offers to let her come in and while they call those idiots and try to figure out what's going on. As a woman, how do you, because they play a lot into the fact that it's a woman traveling alone and it's a man in there. Mm-hmm. I would love your perspective because I only have my, albeit very handsome, man's opinion and man experiences. So what were you thinking when you were watching this?
Well, when I was watching it with you, I want to preface it that I had a distinct advantage than if I had been watching it alone. Mm-hmm. Because if I was watching it alone, I would immediately assume that they're going to take the lazy route and Skarsgård was going to be, the murderer or whatever. And it's all about, Tess trying to survive, because that's kind of the lazy thing that movies tend to do.
Oh, well, it's just a lazy story, whether it's in a whether it's in a movie or a book or a short story. It's just
it's like it's been done a million times.
Yeah.
It's what everyone is already afraid of
and expecting.
So, but because you were so adamant that this was a good movie and I was going to enjoy it and I was going to be freaked out about it, I was like, okay, they're messing with us here. And so my thoughts as, as a woman and as a particularly petite woman is don't go inside.
Okay.
Get back in your car. Fucking go to a police station and just ask them, like, can I park my car outside while I try to figure this out?
And they would beat the hell out of you. They would just start stomping you into the ground. Stop resisting. Stop resisting.
It's like, no, please. I've got my hands up and everything.
Oh, that's their favorite.
That they're like,
them, good, she won't hit us back.
Well, and especially because when I was living in my part of the reason that's where my mind went to is when I was living in my old shitty apartments, and I can say that now because I'm not living there.
You could say it. You did say it.
I did say it then.
Anyway.
I just wasn't as vocal. But when I was in my old shitty apartments and the fucking crackheads wouldn't leave me alone and were camped outside my house, sitting on my stoop and scaring the neighbors so bad that the neighbors were calling me and telling me we're scared to leave the apartment complex because the crackheads are here. I left work very late and I literally went to the police station that was less than a half a mile from the apartment complex. And as I'm sitting in the station, I called the station and I said, can I please get a police escort to my house because I don't know if it's safe for me to go there. And they did. They escorted me and they made sure but that's where my mind went is as a tiny woman, you get a lot of leeway with the law. So if you go, especially because at that point she still had her ID, she still had her phone, she had all her check-in information, she can go to the police and say, like, I don't feel safe. Can you help me? Or at least figure something out.
I do think geography plays a major element, though. Because they even reference that, like, when they call the police later on, that they're like, we don't have any available units.
Yeah.
And where you lived, albeit it had some rough elements, you lived in an intersection of like very, very poverty stricken and somewhat middle class was like together, which actually caused a lot of interesting individuals to beg for money and ask for favors all the time because there were people with no means and people with means right next to each other.
Exactly.
It was a very strange dichotomy. I had never really seen anything like that until you were living there.
Yeah.
Because when you live in the hood, they like leave everybody alone.
Yeah, but when you lived where I lived, and especially being an unassuming person, people would just glom onto me because they're like, "Oh, well, you have kind eyes. Clearly, I can take advantage of that."
What fools they were. So,
but so that's kind of where my mind went.
So your thought was like, girl, don't go in there?
Oh, yeah. I was like, but then there would be no movie, obviously. So she does go in. And the thing that I was kind of noticing is how jumpy Skarsgård was.
He was completely and utterly self-aware of the fact that he's just some strange man and that she's in a situation where she has to be around him.
Yeah.
To the point where it would be endearing if it wasn't a horror movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Like if this was a comedy movie, you'd be like, oh, look at this guy.
Hope they hook up.
Yeah, we just like look at him. He's just so nervous because he doesn't want to be uncomfortable because it's a horror movie. We're like, he's getting you ready. He's fattening you up for the slaughter, man.
But going back to that, to him being so self-aware is, he even once he's woken up, even though he's jumpy and he's kind of like over explaining himself all the time, he's like, do you want tea? Like I saw tea in here. And so he makes her tea, but she goes into the bathroom. Every time she goes in a room, she locks it. So she goes in the bathroom.
And they make a point of really showing that she clicks the lock.
Clicks the lock.
I love that.
Goes to change in the bedroom and she locks the door and she comes back out and, he's got the bottle of wine that's been unopened. And
that apparently was a housewarming, or not a housewarming, but, like a stay warming gift.
Exactly.
Which there are lots of those. I've stayed at a lot of Airbnbs, and that's a very common, not wine necessarily, although I wouldn't be surprised if you were renting a place for over a week that they would leave you a bottle of wine because you're spending a lot of money. And for those who are never stayed at Airbnb or whatever, there's there's no turnover service while you're there. So if you stay for a week, the reason that they're thrilled to give you 15% off is they don't have to pay cleaning people the entire time you're there.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most expensive thing, is that if you're only there for a day or you're only there for 2 days, the cleaning person has to come and go and come and go. And if the landowner or the property owner is not there, which often they're not, they pay a service to do that, and they charge per cleaning.
Exactly.
So that's how it works out.
Yeah, it's kind of an advantage for them.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've stayed at places where I've booked a full week and they gave me a massive discount, and they were so happy that they didn't have to deal with multiple tenants in 1 week.
They're delighted.
Yes.
So that is something. And, we've been staying together, and it's like, oh, we found like butter and like seasoning that people bought while they were staying, and they just didn't pack up. So, well, we're covered on butter and garlic powder. So let's go.
When we stayed in Michigan in that cute little house in Grayling, remember there was a basket full of Michigan goodies.
And that's how we found one of the gift shops that we went
Tip
to.
of the Mitten. Yep.
Tip of the Mitten.
So now they've discussed the situation, and they're like, okay. And he makes a suggestion that I would have made, which is, why don't we both crash here? The house is not small, by the way. It's a pretty sizable house. And they shoot it that way too. You kind of see that there's like the hallways go way down and this and that. And he basically says what I would have said, which is, why don't we both just crash here, and then tomorrow we complain, we both get a free stay out of it, which is exactly what you should do and what would happen. Yeah. Is they would just refund you your money for the inconvenience.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what I would suggest. I'd be like, let's just both stay here for free then. We're clearly not too, it's not too bad of a situation in that way.
Yeah.
And there's a part where he says, like, she apologizes to him. He goes, you're just as put out as I am. Like, he's very polite about everything.
He acknowledges, like, no, this is an inconvenience for both of us.
Yeah.
Well, and that was such an interesting scene, because you start to get a feel for their chemistry together, which, again, if this was like just a comedy, you'd be like, oh man, I bet by the end they're going to be an item. Cause he acknowledges, he's like, oh, look, I made you that tea, but I realized that you didn't drink it. But it's because that, like, I didn't prepare the tea in front of you. So I didn't open the wine bottle. And he's like, showing her,
he
like,
gives this whole speech about how, like, I waited to open the wine bottle until you came in here so you could see me open it if you wanted some. And because he's so nice, he's like, you have to sleep in the bed. So then he has to wash the sheets.
Yeah.
So that's why they have time to kill. Exactly. The sheets are drying.
So he's like, well, let's just enjoy some wine while we're cleaning the sheets. And at first she declines, but then through happenstance, they discover that she's come to Detroit to work on a documentary about jazz musicians. And he happens to be part of an art collective that
a founding member of a jazz company and I love that they don't explain it.
Yeah.
I mean, because all you needed to know is that when he says, I'm actually a founding member of the Lion Tamers, and she goes, no way. Like, all you need is that reaction to know that it matters.
Exactly.
That, and it turns out that, he's in this very depressed part of Detroit to see if they can find a new space for their art collective. More land.
Exactly. So at first she doesn't want to drink, but then it smash cuts. And we joked watching the movie. We're like, this is really just smash cut the movie.
Yeah.
But then it smash cuts to them sitting on the couch, and she's also drinking wine, and they're sitting there talking about jazz.
And that's the other thing I love. They're not just talking about it. They're talking about, like, life, and they're talking about, like, experiences and art and jazz, which is exactly what you would honestly would be a best case scenario if you were stuck with another person.
At least it's somebody you can get along with.
Well, yeah. And if you're going to sit and have to talk for a while, at least you can sip wine and talk about things you both like. And I love the telling stories with pictures. They show that the dryer, because he's like, it's going to be about an hour, that the dryer has stopped spinning, but they're still drinking wine and talking. So that means that they're no longer killing time.
Now they're just enjoying each other's company.
Exactly. Yeah. And she did some other stuff that I wanted to mention. Like, she took a photograph of his ID.
That's right.
What did you think when she first did that? Were you like, good?
Oh, absolutely. I was like, good. And my thought was, again, going back to being someone where this is a bit more in my realm of experience. I noticed that she didn't check in with anyone. Now, there was somebody named Marcus who kept calling her.
Yes.
But she kept ignoring the calls, and her conversation with Keith, you get the idea that, like, this is a soon-to-be ex that she's kind of cutting out of her life.
Right.
And I noticed that she didn't check in with anyone. And what I would have done if this was me in that situation, and you know how close I am with my sister Andrea,
Yes.
but the moment I found out that I was double booked, I would have texted Andrea and told her. And the moment that I found his ID, I would have texted her the picture and I would have said, you need to be on this like white on rice. Please give me any details that you can muster. And it is very surprising how thorough white women can be doing research when they have a hair up their ass.
Well, all they need to know is that there could be murder involved, and
then
that's
it's just
catnip
like that
to them. Yeah. No, and I do want to mention, if you read a little deeper into her life,
Mm-hmm.
she's in Detroit, a place she's never been.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they ever really established where she was coming from.
No.
I kind of assumed it was either New York or Chicago.
Yeah, somewhere.
But they never fully established it. But there's that reference, like where the she's there to interview for a job, and the lady later on says, "Thank you so much for driving all this way." So I assumed it's like Chicago or New York. And, you know, one's a 4-hour drive and one's like a 7-hour drive. They're not horribly different, really.
Yeah.
And she's in this place far away, looking for a job. No real connections to where she's from.
Mm-hmm.
I got the vibe that she's like ready to rebuild.
I could get that. Yeah, I could see that.
And that's the other reason why it's really great when they hit it off, because there's almost like this sense that she's like finding a home. Like she found a person that she has a lot in common with, who could get her into the world she would want to be in if
Yes.
she lived there and stuff.
Yes.
And that's very exciting. So, and as they're talking and stuff, they ride this like really fine line of completely acceptable, non-threatening flirting.
Yeah.
And they never cross it,
Mm-hmm.
which I loved. It felt very real,
Yeah.
because she, like, at one point she mentions, like, he was like, if the roles were reversed, what would you have done? She was like, you would stay in the rain. And he was like, you would really leave me in the rain? She's like, yeah, I would. You're just some guy. He's like, I'm still just some guy. And she's like, yeah, but it's just, the way
she's like, yeah, but
it's
that's different.
you know. But I love that too, that they're like, that's part of their conversation is like, well, you would have done the same for me. And she's like, no, I wouldn't have.
I would not.
Not
have.
even a little bit. I wouldn't have even considered it.
I wouldn't have opened the door.
Yeah, I would. You'd open the door. So now that they're wrapping up their evening,
Mm-hmm.
they have this moment where he walks her to the bedroom and says goodnight. And there's a moment where they could have kissed or something. Or maybe it's just that there's this moment of like, why don't we share the bed? Maybe not to canoodle, but just because we like each other.
Yeah, we can keep talking.
But they don't,
Mm-hmm.
which again felt very real. That moment where it's like, yeah, the chemistry is really good, but like, we're both booked here for a few days. And that was the vibe I got from her, was that she was like, that she was all about that potential next evening where they were staying there. I
Right.
thought that was the one where they were going to order takeout, you know, and another bottle of wine, and they were going to like, you know, watch cable, and that was when they might have their like first kiss. I love that because it really felt real, because it's very rare, you know, in real life that you just kind of meet somebody and hit it off and jump into bed. It's a pretty, and because it's not even, it's unsafe.
Yeah.
And actually I was at, it's weird, all roads lead to the Joe Bob Jamboree. When I was at the Joe Bob's Jamboree in Memphis, the woman whose name's escaping right now that starred in Halloween 3, she was talking about the scene where her character just hops into bed with Tom Atkins. and people were kind of chuckling about it. And she's like, oh, you all don't understand because almost all of you are millennials and Gen Xers, but we did that. This was before AIDS.
Yeah.
You know, we did that. Free love had just ended, and now we just kind of were doing whatever we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually said, she was like, she became a sex therapist. That's why she was extra talking about this. But she was like, I feel bad for you all that most of you've never experienced that, just meeting someone and being like, you're what I like. Let's do something. And I was like, on one hand, yes, but on the other hand, you people are gross.
Yeah, like
So,
that's weird.
you
That's
guys are
weird.
Icky. But no, so I loved that. I loved that. My thought was, if they're going to be there for 5 days, that like by the third day, they're going to be, you know, hitting it like it's going out of style, but they're going to really get to know each other. And if she gets the job, which it looked like she was going to in Detroit, they were probably going to be an item for sure, because they had so much in common.
And they run in the same circles.
Tons of chemistry.
Yeah.
And he's like a kind, friendly, thoughtful man.
Yeah.
Who clearly has multiple sisters. The way he talks to her.
Absolutely.
Oh.
I loved when he said, you get the bed and there's no arguing about it. I'm like, oh, that is such like an old man thing to say.
Oh,
just
yeah.
like totally being like, no, we're there. End of discussion.
Yeah,
you get the bed. I
he
sleep
says,
on the
like,
couch.
I couldn't sleep in this house in a bed knowing that a woman would be sleeping on the couch.
Yeah.
And then he goes outside to get her stuff, even though it's pouring rain. And she's like, you really didn't have to do this. He's like, no argument, no discussion.
Yeah, like I'm doing it for you.
But he also tries to make her feel less, awkward. He even mentions like, plus I have a raincoat. Like you don't have a raincoat. So yeah, I like that stuff. It's all those little details really establish. Well, no, they don't establish what we're going to see. That's kind of the
That's
point.
what makes it so great is it takes you one direction and then bam, totally different direction.
Oh, this film is nothing but side swipes, and we're going to get to the beginning of the film starting to swipe us from the side very much after these quick words from our sponsors. That's the wrong button. I'm leaving that in. It's funny. And we're back on Cutting Deep into Horror, and I have to say, things are about to get really weird in
Yeah.
Barbarian.
Yeah.
So we've established the will they, won't they element of the movie, the unlikely meeting of these two kindred souls in Detroit.
I mean, I'm shipping them.
So the next day, she wakes up.
But
oh, you're
there's
right. The
more.
night, you're
There's
right.
more that
There's
night.
some night stuff. Yes.
So after they have kind of this very, very subtle will they, won't they kind of thing, as Keith is wishing her good night, he leaves her bedroom and we notice that's the first time she doesn't lock the door. So it's the middle of the night and she's hearing some noises like from the hallway and she hears Keith kind of making noises, but her bedroom door is open.
Right. Wide open too. Not cracked.
Not
it's
cracked
fully
like,
open.
oh, there was a draft. It's fully open. So she gets a little freaked out, as we all would.
Well, I think what really freaks her out is that then she hears like struggling and fearful sounds and stuff coming
grunting
from
and
Keith.
noises.
Yeah.
So she goes to check on him and he's very clearly not sleeping well. And she does the thing that I do to you all the time.
Uh-oh.
Which is she just looms over him and touches him and scares the shit out of him, waking him
Well,
up.
and he's having full-blown night terrors.
Oh, yeah.
So,
it's very clear.
Yeah, I don't have night terrors that I'm aware of.
No, thank goodness.
I mean, only you. You were my night terror.
So they kind of have a little discussion. She asks him, like, did you open my door? And he's like, no.
Well, and he's not just like, no, he's like, no, what? Because he's so bothered by the fact that she was looming over him and woke him up. And also, I like this. One of the reasons I started to trust him was he was so human.
Yes.
He's a little shitty when she first wakes him up because
who wouldn't be?
No one wants to be woken up, and he was having like a friggin' banger of a nightmare.
Yeah.
So yeah. So he's like, no, I didn't. Like, what is with you?
Yeah. Kind of a little, very annoyed with her. So she does go back to bed. And that's when we get to the next morning and she wakes up and, kind of rushes to get ready for her interview. And then as she's getting ready to leave, she sees a note from Keith. And, basically saying like, hey, when you leave, please leave the keys in the Dropbox. We'll be back and we'll figure all this out later. P.S. I had a great time last night, smiley face.
Yeah, making it clear that, he's excited to spend more time together, which is smart. I mean, that's what you'd want to do.
Oh, yeah. You got to get your foot in the door, man.
Jeez, you make it so much less classy. But so she steps outside. And this is when we first realize something is not right.
Yeah.
Because as she looks outside, the entire neighborhood is abandoned and in disrepair. The entire neighborhood. Houses with tarps on the roofs. No one lives there.
Yeah.
Whatsoever.
It's a ghost town.
Yeah. It is completely economically depressed and destroyed.
Yeah.
And you would have no idea when you saw it the night before.
Yeah, because the night before you're like, oh, it looks a little rough around the edges, but there's no street lights. There's no illumination. Like all you can see is a bunch of small houses that, this one looks the best.
Yeah.
The end. That's it.
Yeah, the end.
So it really does start to paint a picture of the history of this neighborhood. Telling stories with pictures is this house is really nice, obviously been renovated recently, super up to date, and then all the other houses are just crap.
Well, and the first question that ran through my mind was what kind of total out of touch moron would fix up a house like that and rent it out? But don't worry, that gets answered.
Yeah, we'll find out later.
We'll get there. And boy, was I right. So,
oh boy.
So she leaves.
Yep.
And heads to downtown Detroit to have her job interview, which appears to go very well.
Yes. And we kind of see her and the person that's doing the interview. We see them jive a little bit, but we really don't get much of their conversation except the end where it's basically said like, yeah, you're part of the project.
It's all smiles. It's all, you'll hear from me tomorrow, first thing. But then she says, where are you staying? And she said, oh, at a little Airbnb. And she's like, oh, that's cute.
Yeah.
And then she tells her the neighborhood and she goes, what?
Well, yeah. And I even wrote it down. Tess says she's in Brightmoor. And the lady's face just drops. And literally the first thing that she says is, you shouldn't be there.
Yeah, not even a little. Just, you shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Like, immediately. And I just want to say that reminded me, I've traveled a lot. And that reminded me of the first time I went to Toronto. Because I was trying to find where I was going. This is before GPS. But it was.
Thanks, Grandpa.
It was before GPS. And before combustion engines, my horses knew the way.
I had to walk 9 miles uphill both ways.
Well, it was kilometers, but yes. No, so I ended up stopping in a gas station parking lot because I was lost in Toronto trying to find my hotel, which was in a very bad part of town. Now, I was a dummy and I believed Michael Moore in his documentary, so I thought there was no bad part of Canada. Oh, there's bad parts of Canada, of Toronto in particular. But so I told the lady, I was like, excuse me, I'm looking for Roncesvalles Boulevard. And she looked at me and went, oh my God, Roncesvalles Boulevard? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, oh, fuck a duck. She said, fuck a duck. Oh, fuck a duck. And I was like, it was bad. They said free, safe, monitored parking. And it was 2 blocks from the actual hotel. It was a very bad area. Anyway, but I think of things like that, it's like you're staying on Roncesvalles Boulevard. You're staying in that part of Detroit. You don't belong there. Get out of there.
It's when the natives tell you that it's a bad part of town is when you know it's a really bad part of town.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, but she explains like, oh, what? She mentions like, oh, I have a roommate, he's a guy I met. She's like, okay, that sounds really dangerous.
Yeah. And I mean, basically leaves on like, well, stay safe. I hope I see you next time.
Yeah, really. No wonder good hope's hard to find.
Ooh.
Pulling on the collar. So she heads back home, and this is one of my favorite first big fake outs.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the stuff with the will they, won't they, but this is when we start to get a taste of what's coming, what's really coming. Mm-hmm. As she gets out of her car in this busted neighborhood, you see a figure way off in the distance, completely out of focus, heading towards her at a full pace clip. And he starts yelling, hey, hey. And then he starts saying, little girl, don't go in there. Yeah. Little girl. And she does what I think anyone would do, myself included. Just bolts into the house, locks the door, and he's pounding on the door saying like, come out here, here.
And yeah, well, and it really gets you in the moment because, everyone's had an experience with, a homeless person or, someone on the streets begging for change. And it always makes us a little uncomfortable just having that interaction. Yeah. But then when you picture like, oh, what would I do if like a homeless person just like ran full bore at me? You're like, well, that's not a good thing.
Well, and yelling, little girl, don't go in that house.
Yeah. And another one that I wrote down because I thought that it was prudent. Yeah, it was prudent. He says, you shouldn't go in that house. Like,
Oh, you
not
shouldn't
even
go in
like
that
just,
house.
yeah, it's like, you shouldn't do this is bad. And that's when she calls the police and, says that there's a homeless person. They chase me into this Airbnb that I'm staying at. And the police dispatcher literally says, we have no free units.
Yeah.
We can't even send someone. Like, not in 15 minutes, not in 20 minutes, not in an hour. We can't do it at all, period.
Oh, when I grew up in an area where sometimes you'd call the police and they didn't come at all. I that's a real thing. People don't think it is. That's a real thing.
Mm.
In rough parts of the country, like in certain parts of Los Angeles and stuff, they actually audit 911 because of that. They call 911 and give certain addresses and time how long it takes. And sometimes it takes 3 hours, or they don't come at all and somebody gets fired. And when I was growing up, I lived in an area where they came hours later.
Ugh.
Hours.
Ugh.
So I get that. So yeah, there's nothing they could do, but they're like, well, just stay inside.
Yeah.
I believe that's what they said.
Yeah,
just stay inside.
just stay inside. So that's when she starts doing her business around the house, kind of like getting settled. I get the feeling that she was kind of just waiting for Keith to show up.
Of course she was. He's like this super cool guy.
Yeah.
Like, she doesn't know anyone in Detroit anyway. Like, it's the perfect, you made a friend. At the very
Exactly.
least, you made a buddy, and he's good looking. You know, he's
Yeah.
a little odd, but
that's musicians.
relatively harmless.
Yeah. He hasn't tried to kill her yet.
Not
so.
yet, no. But then she's, speaking of doing business, does her business
Mhm.
and realizes that there's no toilet paper in the bathroom at all. Not in the cabinets, not in the cupboards.
Yeah, she looks everywhere, and she
Yeah.
looks high and low everywhere in the main part of the house, in the kitchen, and she's looking around in the bedroom, and
Yeah.
there's like a linen closet, and that's when she finally sees across at the very end of the hall is a door going down to the basement.
Yes, and this is something that cannot possibly go wrong. So let's go ahead and move past this. So she goes down to the basement, gets the toilet paper, comes back up. No, I'm just kidding. So she goes down into this average-looking basement.
Yeah, it's just an unfinished basement,
Yeah.
which are creepy, but in a just basement way, just a base level. Oh, it's creepy.
A
just
basement level.
base. Yeah, I see what you did there.
Great.
But thankfully, the toilet paper's down there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for her, as she's getting a roll of toilet paper, the door at the top of the stairs, due to a draft or whatever, closes and locks her inside.
Yes.
And she realizes that she left her cell phone upstairs.
And she has the only key to get in the front door.
Because
So-
she didn't put it back in the lockbox.
So, because she was going to be home.
Mhm.
But so Keith, when he gets there, can't get in the house to help her.
Yeah.
Anyhow. And I do want to mention, one of the things that always keeps my imagination going wild when I stay at Airbnbs is there's almost always one door that's locked.
Yes.
And I'm sure it's just full of personal effects
Mhm.
or cleaning supplies that they don't want you messing with or
Usually,
whatever.
Yeah.
But it always makes you go like,
I wonder what's in there.
what's in there? Yeah, it's usually like a closet or a basement
Mhm.
that's locked off.
Mhm.
Maybe they don't want you messing with the water heater. I don't know.
That makes
You know,
sense.
it depends on the people. But so, yeah, the idea that it's like she goes down there and then it locks itself makes me think that door was supposed to be locked
Yeah.
so that she couldn't go down there. I know for a fact that one Airbnb I stayed at, they apologized because I ran out of paper products. They just forgot that I was staying there for 7 or 8 days. And they apologized because the paper products were all locked in a closet so that nobody would just take them all.
Yeah.
This was post-COVID. So
yeah.
they were worried people
toilet
would
paper's at a premium.
they would just take all the toilet paper and all of the paper towels. So she's stuck in this basement, looking around, trying to figure out, is there a way to get out?
Mm-hmm.
And as she's looking around, she finds something a little unnormal.
Yeah.
That's a
Uncommon.
word.
Uncommon.
Unusual would have been a better use of
Yeah.
English. This is why I read stories written down.
Not off the top of your head.
Nah. But she notices a rope. But not just like any rope, a rope sticking through a hole in the wall that, as she pulls on it, It goes longer and longer and longer.
And then it swings open a hidden door.
A very well hidden door.
Mm-hmm.
And to her credit, she does not immediately go in there all excited to die.
Yeah.
Like many people in horror films do.
Yeah. She even, like, this is one of my favorite lines, is because she's sitting there staring at this long hallway.
Yeah,
and then
like
she just
crazy
says,
long.
She just says, nope, and just walks away.
There's a moment of that in the newer Candyman movie too, where somebody looks down a basement and just goes, nope. I love it. And then, of course, that's why I loved when Jordan Peele's movie came out called Nope. I was like, fair. I agree with this Nope.
Yeah. And so she does have that moment, I would say a moment of clarity.
Yeah. In a horror film for sure.
Yeah. Where she's like, nothing that is in there could be worth my life. I'm just going to stay put. But the problem is, we don't know how long she's been down there, but we get the feeling that a lot of time has passed.
At least 2 hours, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then she notices there's a mirror on the other side of the wall. So she pulls over the mirror, and she actually does something really clever. She uses the mirror to reflect the light from this little unfinished basement down into the hall. So at least she has a little bit of light to see.
Yeah, she basically turns the ceiling light into a flashlight by reflecting its light.
Yeah. Ancient Egyptians did it. It's great.
They had ceiling lights?
Well, sunlight coming in from
I'm just teasing you. Yeah, no. I've done it on a movie set.
Yeah.
It's a reflector, but mirrors reflect light, perfectly, as opposed to a reflector which diffuses it and blah, 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 blah. No more film talk.
Okay.
Well, except about the film. Quiet you. But so she does that, but unfortunately, all it really shows her is it confirms to her that it goes really far.
Yeah. Well, and it goes really, really, really far. And she finds a room, and it's a tiny room.
It's like right off to the right when you first kind of start getting in there.
To a dead end. And there is a light in the room, and there's 3 other things in the room. There is a very, very dirty and disgusting mattress, a bucket, and an old video camera on a tripod.
That's straight up VHS video camera.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will say the tripod was prosumer. Like that was the kind of tripod you would have bought if you were very serious about whatever it was you were videotaping.
Well, we're going to find out about that.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
She assumes what all of us would assume, what I would assume, is this is the murder room, and immediately gets back out. Goes back to the unfinished basement and panics a little bit. Luckily, Keith has arrived.
Yes.
And there's a tiny, one of those tiny windows. And so
basement window.
Yeah, basement window. So she and Keith manage to open that up. She gives him the key. He comes in, and she's in hysterics. And she's like, we need to leave immediately.
Yeah, but because she's so freaked out, which I would be very scared as well, what she's saying to him is like, there was a door, and there was a room, and it had a bucket and a bed and a camera. And he's like, a bucket, a bed, and a camera. She's like, and a handprint. She didn't mention that it looked like it was blood.
But it does.
She was missing details because she was so friggin' scared. And I would also want to get out of there ASAP.
Yeah.
So I can't say I blame her.
Yeah. So, but Keith does, again, it's very real. It's very genuine. He doesn't dismiss her.
Yeah.
At all. And he doesn't have this moment of, oh, you're crazy. All he says is, well, I want to check it out to see what you saw.
Yeah, I want to see what this is, and then we can do something about it.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is reasonable if you weren't in a horror movie.
Yeah.
Like, I get where he's coming from.
Yeah, but no one knows they're in a horror movie.
And where they are, like, he's probably like, is this something that I can actually just deal with?
Yeah.
Or do we actually have to call the police and deal with that mess?
Right.
Yeah.
Because again, we get the feeling that he may not be from this particular area, but he's definitely from Detroit. So he kind of probably has a better idea of what dealing with the police would be like.
I would say so.
So he goes down there. Tess stays upstairs right at the door to the basement. And, he goes down the long hall. And, she's calling down to him. She's like, do you see it? And he says, yeah, I see it. And then goes totally unresponsive.
Yeah, dead silence.
And Tess thinks about it for a minute. But she's got a heart. And she might like him a little bit, but mostly she's got a heart.
No,
and
she has a big heart.
That's something that you get throughout this whole movie is she doesn't want to leave anyone to chance. She will put herself in harm's way to help someone out. So she starts going down the stairs, and then she realizes that the basement door is closing again.
And she runs up and stops it. Right before she would have been locked, and she grabs a chair, slams it down, and confirms that bad boy is not closing. But that is about the end of her intelligent choices for quite a while.
So she goes through, the basement, through the long hall. She goes into the room. No sign of Keith anywhere. Which is weird because it's a long hall. It just ends in a dead end with that room. There's nowhere that he could have hidden. And then as she's looking...
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors, and then you can find out what she finds at the end of the hallway. I am such a professional. And we are back with Cutting Deep into Horror. And speaking of deep, Tess in Barbarian is about to go deep into the recesses of this house. And we're about to go deep into the recesses of your personal fear, a recurring nightmare of yours. And one of the reasons why this film's horror elements are so strong, because so far we've mostly been talking about how strong its characterization is, how strong the drama is, how strong the setting is, how strong the performances are. But oh no, my friends, now we are really getting to the horror of the matter.
Yes.
So what's happening next?
So as Tess is looking around and she can't find Keith, she notices a panel on the far wall, the dead end, that looks a little bit different than all the rest. And she kind of pushes the panel aside and a door opens up to a cavern of blackness going to a stairway that goes deep, deep, deep into the earth. And it's so deep that using her phone's flashlight, she can't even see more than a few feet in front of her.
Yeah.
And that's where this movie, and I know you're excited to talk about my fears and traumas.
Always, but I'm excited because we've spent an hour describing basically the first 38 minutes of the film because it's masterfully set up. But we're climbing up a hill.
Yeah.
That eventually we're going to roll down in sheer terror.
Yes.
So please.
So when we first watched this movie together when we were in the theaters, I got chills and I got a icy feeling in my stomach, like when you're deeply instinctively scared where you just feel your stomach knot up and you just feel
definitely. I've never heard it called icy, but I like that.
Because I had, as a child, I would have recurring nightmares about being in a house. Sometimes it would be a new house, but a lot of times it would be my family home. And finding a door that would go to a passageway, that would go downstairs, that would go to more passageways, and I would get lost and couldn't find my way out, and I was being hunted by monsters in these deep, cavernous, labyrinthine underground tunnels beneath my house. And this was so common that I would kind of no. I'm like, it's been a few weeks. I'm probably due for another basement nightmare.
Do you know what was chasing you, or was it just that you knew?
I just knew.
So you never saw it?
I never saw it. And that's honestly, in nightmares, that's scary.
Oh, I agree. No. It's often I'll tell you about my dreams and I'm always I don't know why, but I knew that I lived there.
Yeah.
They're things that just you know. Like the backstory is already installed in your consciousness in a dream.
Exactly.
So you knew
Yeah.
something not so great was going to happen to you if you didn't skedaddle.
Yes.
That's terrifying. Not going to lie. That's really scary. I'm not a person who's prone to nightmares. That's really scary.
Yeah. I wouldn't recommend it for those of you listening at home. If you can avoid that particular nightmare, do.
So what went through your mind when we were sitting in the movie theater? Dark movie theater. And all of a sudden, she's going through this cavern. And
then she starts to hear Keith yelling for help.
yes.
So she can't turn back.
Hell
'Cause
no.
again, she's got a big heart. She can't just leave somebody behind. And what was going through my head, again, going back to these nightmares, is I was like, oh, now we get to the monster. Because that's where my subconscious would always go, is
Of
like,
course.
oh, once you get down the stairs, well, that's it. There's the monster somewhere, and it knows where you are.
Is
But
this why you like Minecraft so much? This is weird.
It's kind of like immersion therapy.
I mean, I'm not even trying to be funny. I mean, like when I watch you play Minecraft, it's like you're digging deeper and deeper and deeper. Sorry, I'm not trying to sidetrack us, but like, wow.
Well, and the way I am odd because the
Yes.
way that the way that I eventually got over those nightmares is I would talk to my younger brothers about them, and we made up a really weird character. We called him Joey the albino dwarf. And we would make up stories about Joey living in these tunnels underneath our house, and that he was kind of like, he wasn't a bad guy, but he wasn't necessarily a great guy either because he had a nuclear weapons silo beneath us.
I mean, yeah, that's something, that's, I would say that's morally onerous. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that kind of making up stories about it where it was at least a little more lighthearted and there was at least
I don't know why you find albinism and nuclear war lighthearted, but okay.
compared to the unknown, that's pretty tame.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was kind of how I got over it, is I would have a bad nightmare and then I would talk to my younger brothers about like Joey the albino dwarf and like what he was doing down there. And it couldn't have been all bad because at least Joey like was friendly with me in the stories.
Yeah.
But that's as Tess is going through, going down the stairs and she hears Keith and then she's walking around and she sees a little alcove with dog cages. Rusty,
a lot of dog
like
cages.
6, 8, 10 dog cages just all lined up next to each other. And you hear Keith, help, help. Like, that's where my brain was going like, okay, there's something down here and it lives here and it probably isn't going to take too kindly to you trespassing on its little tunnels.
Oh, I don't know. My fear was that there's something down here and it's going to be thrilled to see you. That's my fear.
So as she's kind of exploring, she comes to a room, and in the room, it's just the floor is littered with trash, and it's got this weird purple lighting, which is very, very off-putting. And it's got an old TV in the center of the room.
Television,
Yeah.
tube-style television with a VCR hooked in.
And it's playing a tape.
A VHS tape of...
How to nurse your baby.
Yeah, it's like one of those instructional videos, but it's about new mothers nursing their baby.
Which is weird.
Like, well, it's one of those things. I love how stacking certain things can be creepy. Like, okay, mom is breastfeeding a baby. Like, some people are squeamish to it. I don't get that personally. But some people might find that a little weird. But mom breastfeeding a baby on a VHS tape being played on a television screen underneath the earth in a secret cavern with no explanation whatsoever.
Suddenly that's a little sinister.
A little. Yeah, just a smidgen.
Just
Jeez.
a little bit sinister.
Just a skosh.
So she very wisely does not go into that room. She keeps hearing Keith, and then he comes stumbling out of the darkness, and he looks like shit. And now he is the one who is hysterical, and he's all like, we got to get out, we got to get out, we got to go that way, because that way I know something's coming to get us. And she's just trying to get more information out of him.
And the tables have been completely turned. I love that. Now he can't explain properly what he saw because he doesn't understand it.
Yeah, it was so horrific that all he knows is bad, get out.
Yeah.
That's all he can convey, that's all he knows. And so we start thinking as an audience, like, okay, they're going to get out together and then it'll be kind of like being pursued by whatever it is. No. This thing comes out of the darkness, grabs Keith's head, and bashes his brains in.
Sure does.
Goodbye, Keith. That's it. And then, because we said this is Smash Cut the movie.
Yes.
Suddenly, we're in the West Coast following some dude driving in his nice red convertible. He's singing along to music. He's having a great day.
And not just any guy. Justin Long in the film. Justin Long, who there has been a running joke for years that if you see Justin Long pop up in a horror movie, don't get too attached.
Yeah.
The man gets turned into walruses. The man gets killed by the Creeper and Jeepers Creepers. You know, he's not had a lot of luck being in a horror film.
No.
But he is just living his best life, driving up the Pacific Coast Highway. And he gets a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to linger on it too much, but it is important. It turns out that he's an actor,
mm-hmm.
and he was just doing a pilot, and someone that worked on the pilot has made public accusations that he committed some kind of a sexual assault.
Yeah.
Which then it's revealed that basically he's being accused of rape
mm-hmm.
of a co-star.
Yes. And not only is he being accused of rape, but they're taking him off the project completely.
Yes, but even though they are investigating, they like he gets to the heart of it. He's like, yeah, but what does this mean? And they're like, it's over.
Yeah. So he gets bad news there. Then he's going to talk to his accountant to try and figure all this out because now he's got to factor in like legal fees.
And he has no job.
So he has no income. And his accountant, basically lays it out like, okay, well, this is going to cost you like, what did he say? Like 140 mil? All in.
140,000.
140,000. All in on all these fees, and you don't have any income, so you're going to have to look at selling your properties. And
well, especially his house in Los Angeles.
Especially his house in LA.
And as you're watching this, I'm sure you're wondering, what does this have to do with this movie we've been watching for 40 minutes?
And then the accountant mentions, well, you've got properties in Michigan.
Well, no, he says, what about my Michigan properties?
That's it.
And he's like, well, they're a small source of income. And he's like, well, I could get something for them. He's like, maybe.
Yeah. And the accountant even says, like, yeah, you could sell them and then you would buy yourself 2 or 3 months time, maybe. And then the accountant drops a bit of a bombshell and says, by the way, you're going to have to look for someone else to do all this for you. I will be faxing over all your papers.
Yeah,
because
he doesn't want anything to do with
this.
Yeah.
I can't do this right now.
Because he's being accused of doing something really heinous. And at this juncture, we have no clue if it's true or not,
mm-hmm.
but we know that it's bad.
It's bad.
Very bad, yeah.
So we kind of follow this character, AJ, and he gets off the plane. He's obviously traveling. He mentions he gets a phone call, and I'm pretty certain it's from the attorney.
Yeah.
And he mentions getting into a rental car, and the attorney gets very cross with him. And AJ explains, like, no, I'm not fleeing anything. I just want to go to Detroit to check out my properties and see, what's up. See
and
if
it
I can
becomes
sell
clear
them.
he's from there originally.
He's from there.
Yeah, which would make sense then why he'd buy up properties when he had some money.
Because it's his hometown.
Well, and it's because the properties are cheap. Remember when I said, what kind of dumbass, out of touch human being?
Well, apparently AJ.
We found him, kids. We found him.
So, his attorney does say, like, this is not a good look right now.
Yeah, to leave Los Angeles.
LA. But AJ, he's not thinking about that. He just wants to figure out the finances.
Well, and he literally tells him, like, unless you want to work pro bono for me, I need to be out here making this money. Yeah.
So he goes to the Airbnb. He does see, he sees their luggage around, and he sees, the house obviously isn't a mess, but he does see stuff around where he even calls the property management service and asks, like, when was the last time that there was somebody booked? And they're like, oh, it's been like weeks ago.
Yeah, and he's like, well, then why hasn't the place been cleaned?
And they're like, oh, well, if nobody comes in, then we don't hire the cleaners.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So then he gets a call from his parents. There's a moment that humanizes him a little bit because he's talking to his mom, and his mom mentions that it's not a far drive for them. They would love to come out and see him. And he asks, like, Dad says that? And she says, oh, well, you know how your father is. And you see it, like, break him on screen. And you're like, oh, there's a lot of baggage with this guy.
Imagine that, though, an actor with baggage. Never heard of such a thing. No, and you feel for him because also his mom is a bit of a yenta.
Yeah.
She's a bit of a nudge. She's a bit of she's a lot.
She's a lot to deal with.
Very quickly, because she's like, what am I supposed to tell my... Because it's a brilliant storytelling device, because she's like, what am I supposed to tell my friends? And he's like, I don't know, Mom, that she's a lying bitch. And she's like, don't use language like that. It's like his mom is making it about her.
Yes.
But AJ has a really bad habit of making everything about him. And we're going to discover that even more as we progress, because AJ is a fascinating mental specimen. He's definitely deeply narcissistic. It becomes very clear because he is like, I'm being accused of these things, like, well, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my money? What's going to happen to all this stuff? And he's very denying that anything bad happened.
Yeah.
But then he goes and meets up with one of his old buddies.
Yep.
And they go to a bar and tie one off and, blow off some steam.
Yep. And his buddy, even as they're drinking and getting more and more drunk, his buddy even asks him, like, well, what did happen? And AJ, kind of gives this whole, well, there's two sides to every story. And like, well, yeah, sure. I invited her back to my room. And of course she took some convincing. And the guy even asks, like, well, did she say no? He's like, well, yeah, she said no at first, but I just kept pressing it. And eventually she was fine with it.
Well, and he says it in that very, like, so we just kept, like, kissing and fooling around. And eventually she was down. And
I think you should speak on that, because that's probably, I mean, do you ever get concerned about, like, as a guy?
Yeah, go ahead. Take me way out of my comfort zone right now. Yeah, I'm sitting up straight.
Pushing too hard? Because me dating, like, I don't feel like I could push too hard.
Sure.
But is that ever a concern for you?
Yeah. No, it is. There's a very fine line in dating when you're a man. And I don't want to be all woe is me, man suffering, but men have hard things just like women have hard things. They deal with hardships and such. There's this element where, like, you as a man need to be the aggressor, but don't be aggressive. So you need to ask a girl out, because they will they'll generally never ask you out, but you need to not be so aggressive that they feel uncomfortable saying no. But also, if they like brush you off and you go away right away, sometimes women will be like, well, you were just, not that serious. You didn't pursue me. You weren't serious about me. You didn't care when it's like, it's a hard dance. And I could see where someone like AJ, who is all about himself, all about his money, all about his career, could compartmentalize and really convince himself that this was just a complicated interaction.
Yes.
And you know what? He might be right. But part of what makes that interaction so complicated could be that she regrets kind of bending to what he wanted. And that's not good. He was the star of the pilot, which means that there was a power imbalance. I mean, have you heard about this stuff with Lizzo recently?
Yeah.
I like that. I like bringing that up because Lizzo is so far from what we're used to hearing about bosses and famous people pushing people to do things sexually that they're not comfortable with. You don't usually hear that about a woman, especially like a artist.
Yeah.
But she, without getting into a horrific amount of detail, she pushed these people who worked for her to do sexual things that they may not have wanted to do, but they felt pressured to because it was in the sense of like a team building exercise, I guess. And I remember whenever people would say that, I'm like, well, it's not like they'd feel any pressure. I mean, she was just their boss and one of the most famous people to ever live. So I'm sure they didn't feel like they couldn't say no.
No, of course not.
And so I get that. I feel like with AJ, it's more the fact that there is nuance to dating is how he can get himself comfortable with the idea that he didn't do anything wrong.
Exactly. And I think it's important character building too, because you see how he is able to compartmentalize his actions versus the consequences. And that plays out throughout the rest of the movie, even to like the last few minutes.
Well, and I hate to blow your mind here, but the house is a compartmentalization. One nice house.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't think of that. No, that's, and I like that.
Yeah, I think we're going to take a quick break so that you can think on that some more. I just thought of that, but I'm a genius. But we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Cutting Deep into Horror. Now we're back with Cutting Deep into Horror, and Rachel has just basically attacked me by making me talk about the nuances of dating as a man and the complexity of compartmentalizing your own bad actions and justifying them. Thanks for that. But I had a realization right before the break that the house is a good example of the way he sees the world. Because the house is nice and neat and average, except that where it is, it stands out because it is. But underneath the home, there's lots that's been built over time, a lot of ugliness that's out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
But not to everybody.
And we'll get into it a little bit more.
I felt great because I blew your mind on that.
You did.
idea.
I had to take a step back. Like,
awesome. No, I was really thrilled with that insight.
So after AJ drinks with his friend, he goes back home and he makes the championship decision to call the actress while he's shit-faced.
Dial her. Oh yeah, and give like the most half-ass apology.
Yeah,
like,
and it. I mean, he did apologize, but not for his actions. He apologized for her feelings,
which is a step.
It's a step
toward empathy,
but it's not empathy full forced.
Well, also it's yeah, no, it's just kind of. I get what he thought he was doing. He was like, I don't feel that I hurt you, but if you feel hurt, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
and it's like. I mean, I've had to make that apology before legitimately. Like, I wasn't hiding from, like, I literally was like, I don't see how it hurts you, but it clearly did. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's part of being a grown-up is apologizing,
drunk.
Even when you don't, drunk. Well, preferably. The drunker, the better. Isn't that a saying? Like, the more drunk you are, the better the apology?
I that sounds like something my Grammy used to tell me all the time before bed. Anyway.
So it's the next morning, and AJ's not feeling great.
No,
after that night drinking.
Well, and then he hold on. He's like, he wakes up and he's like, I don't know. And then he calls Ralph on the big white phone.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good meeting with the porcelain god.
Yeah, I'm glad. We were just talking about the purge earlier, and now here we are again. So he gets the bad out. And now he's back on track about he's got to get his finances in order and figure out what to do. But then he really notices like the house is not right. Because like after he's done, man, I can't think of another hilarious term for puking. Damn it. He notices a electric toothbrush plugged in on the floor, which I thought was one of the best little details of Skarsgård staying there, was that there's a charging electric toothbrush sitting on the floor. I remember I even said to you when we were watching it, I was like, well, that makes perfect sense because it's like you get there and you're like, really? The only outlet in the bathroom is on the floor? Well, then I guess that's where my toothbrush charger
that's where
is.
the toothbrush.
Of course, then I was like, what an amateur. I never bring my toothbrush charger. It could brush like 50 times before it actually needs a charge.
Yeah, if you're your words for if you're staying for a week, just don't bring the charger.
Yeah, no. I've had my toothbrush die unexpectedly because I didn't realize I unplugged the charger for like 2 weeks. And it finally just gave up the ghost. And I'm like, oh, crap, it wasn't charging all that time? Anyway, I digress. I travel way too much, and I think about these things a lot.
Clearly.
Ugh. So he notices that, and that's when he realizes there's luggage still in the house, and he starts to wonder if they're still there.
Yeah. And his concern is for squatters.
Yes.
So he goes down in the basement, and he is kind of just yelling out for people like, hey, come out there. I know you're here. I'm going to call the police, which we know is an empty threat, but a squatter may be concerned. But once and let me double check my notes, but he almost immediately finds the rope that leads to the hidden tunnel. And he starts seeing dollar bill signs.
Oh, it's one of the funniest things, especially as a new homeowner. One of the funniest things. He sees the door open. He realizes there's like a terrifying cavern. And then he's on the computer Googling, can I list this as square footage so that he can charge more for the house? And so good.
And
good.
It had some brilliant visual storytelling because we see him pick out, and we were talking about the tiniest shiv, but he picks out the most pathetic little paring knife.
I really think it was a skinning knife.
Like a fillet knife.
A scaling knife, that's the word.
Scaling knife.
Yeah.
So just this tiniest little pathetic knife, and he's got it with him, and he's got a flashlight and a tape measure.
Yeah, that's the tape measurer. And I want to point out, right when he goes down there, because he doesn't leave the chair there because he doesn't understand that door closes itself.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed something this watch. If you want to talk about symbolism and yada yadas, the door has a key, like a keyhole that's been painted over. It's sealed by paint and maybe spackle.
Ooh, so again,
I feel like there's a symbolism. When you're a shit landlord, you just paint over everything and say like, it's new now, and you're a piece of crap. And this homie, he kind of paints over everything and says like, it's fixed.
Yeah. And he does that with the home, and he does that in his life.
And he probably does that, just when he orders at McDonald's, for Christ's sake. He's so four-dimensional that he's almost one-dimensional. Like, once you understand how complicated he is, it's very easy to predict what he'll do.
He's not complicated at all. So, he goes down there, and there's a hilarious scene as he's measuring the hallway, and then he's so focused on measuring everything so he can list it as part of the space that he totally ignores the murder room being an obvious murder room.
He's so excited about the fact that this discovery will benefit him that he does not care about anything else, including how obvious it is that this is bad.
Yeah.
And as a 30-something-year-old person, some of the hardest laughs I've ever had in a theater were when he was trying to up his property values by claiming the friggin' murder tunnels.
And he even goes down, he sees the alcove with all of these rusty dog cages lines up, and he starts measuring that too.
Yeah, he's measuring around them so that he can get a proper idea of the square footage.
So what cages? There's what? So then he gets to the room that's got the VHS tape with the instructional video on how to take care of a newborn. And he whips out the tape measure, and then something grabs it. And from way out in the darkness, rips it out of his hands. And he starts to run away with the monster following him, but then he drops the knife, scrapes himself up, keeps running, and then falls into a pit.
Yeah, and like a straight up pit.
Yeah,
which
like
then
8 feet deep. Pit.
Which then a lid shuts on top of it, and it's like a cage lid, like it's like a medieval pit.
Yeah, Like,
yeah, like I just wanted to make it
oubliette
very clear, like
lid.
you're not being cute with the description. It is literally a pit made for pitting.
Whatever you do with pits, that's what it's there for. Which, conveniently, Tess is there. Not looking too hot, but she's alive and she's there.
And she clearly has some insight into how to stay alive down there.
Because she immediately starts telling him, don't panic, don't get agitated. When you're agitated, she gets agitated.
Yes.
And he obviously doesn't understand. And then we see the lid, and we see greasy, disgusting, gnarly hair. And then we see a grotesque hand with an equally disgusting baby bottle. But it's like a giant cartoonish baby bottle.
Because I think that the nipple on it has been malformed from overuse.
Yes.
That would be my guess.
Probably. And this hand just reaches down, and Tess tells him, you have to drink it. Tess drinks out of the bottle, like as kind of a way of showing example. AJ refuses.
Of course he does.
Because it's gross.
It's gross AF.
Like, I would have a hard time drinking out of it, too.
I reckon.
Well,
that's because you're short. She'd have to really reach
she'd
down.
really have to reach down in there. So
he refuses to drink, and the lady gets mad.
Very mad, and opens up the lid and gets right in his face. And that's where we start to get a little bit of a feel of this monster, because it's a human-ish, but very malformed, gross teeth and naked, and looks like she's never bathed a day in her life. And then we smash cut to the neighborhood in like the 60s or 70s, and everything looks great. The aspect ratio is different,
It's
which you pointed
4:3.
out.
Yeah.
The lens is all the wide angle lens,
All wide
so
angle
everything
shots.
looks totally different.
Bright, vibrant colors. All the houses are brand new looking, and they're all like blues and greens and yellows
yellow and pink.
Yeah,
and
they're all bright and beautiful. But not everything is bright and beautiful. Because we see, I can't remember, I don't think they ever name him, but Frank was his name. Okay. Played by Richard Brake, who has been in a ton of great films and great horror films. He was most recently in the Monsters movie, the new Monsters movie by Rob Zombie. Really underrated actor, in my opinion, but maybe other horror fans might go, no, he's not. He's amazing. Everyone knows it. But I think he's underrated. And he is just a working class dude in Detroit, and everything seems nice. And if I remember correctly, that's when his neighbor says something to him, right?
Well, not
Or am I getting
quite.
ahead of myself?
We're getting ahead of yourself.
Okay, sorry.
Because we follow Frank. He gets into his car.
Okay.
And I found it was really interesting because for most of this sequence, the camera follows behind Frank.
Yeah.
So he drives to grocery store, or, some kind of...
Definitely the old school regional supermarket.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like calling it a supermarket because
It
that
is a
feels even
supermarket.
older. Yeah, it was just a supermarket.
And he's just kind of walking up and down the aisles with his shopping cart, and a lady comes up and asks him what he needs. And first thing he says is he needs plastic cloths.
Yep.
And then he says, and diapers and baby stuff. And she kind of perks up. And I love, like, if there was a movie like just about this lady, like absent-mindedly, but being so helpful, trying to help serial killers, but never knowing.
This sweet middle-aged lady, she's like,
baby stuff. I like baby
I'll
stuff.
show you right now. I'll walk you.
So she starts asking him questions about the baby. Is the baby here? How old is the baby? He says, well, the baby's on the way. And she gets excited and says, okay, well, are you going to be taking it to this particular hospital when the baby's born? He says, no, it's going to be a home birth. And she thinks about this and she asks, well, did the...
Well, no, she loves that.
Oh, yeah, home birth.
She loves it. She's like, oh, God bless you, like, for doing that.
And then asks about the midwife. And he says, no, I'm going to do it myself.
It's just us, yeah.
And that's when she pauses a minute and she's like, oh. And she says something along the lines of, oh, you poor thing. And then she asks, do you have vinyl gloves? Yeah, I think so. But she grabs him another box of vinyl gloves. And
Latex
then she
gloves. They weren't fancy back then.
Oh, it was latex.
I know. I busted you. No. So she puts the gloves in there.
And then she grabs an instructional video, a cassette.
Wait a second. This had to have been the 80s then if there was a cassette. And that makes sense, though, because in the next scene, as he's packing his car up, he starts stalking a young woman.
Mm-hmm. So he gets everything in his car. He sees a young woman and he follows her back home, and he parks, down the street a little bit so she doesn't quite see him. He goes back to his trunk, opens it up, and he's got a worker's uniform.
That says Carlos.
I mean, totally strikes me as a Carlos.
I mean, don't you judge us light-skinned Hispanics, first of all. But no, and to me, my first thought when I saw it was like stolen from a laundromat.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So he goes up to the door, knocks, and he says that he's there with
What was like Detroit Water and Power, DWP.
DWP. And he says that they need to investigate because there's been complaints in the neighborhood. He goes to the bathroom, turns on the faucet, unlocks the bathroom window, turns off the faucet, goes back and says, "Oh, you're all in the clear." And she says, "Oh, really? Like you saw everything you need to?" And he just gets this smirk. And he says, "Oh, yeah, we're good. But if you have any problems, just give us a call."
Yeah, and he's so nonchalant, which is why he's like, that's why they call him con men. It's confidence men.
Yes.
He's walking in there like, "Look, I don't want to be in your house either, lady, but you got to let me in, okay? Because like I got to get this done.
My boss is going to get mad if I don't do this.
I got a baby to deliver at some point, apparently." And but yeah, so he leaves, and it's very clear he'll be back.
Yeah.
So then he goes home.
And that's when his neighbor mentions.
Yeah, his neighbor comes up to him and tells him, "Hey, there's going to be a sign on my yard tomorrow. I don't want you to be surprised." And he establishes the fact that the neighborhood is going to crap.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's starting to get out of there.
And if they don't get out now, then they may not even be able to get out next year.
Yeah, they might. Well, because by then they'll be in the hole. The house won't be worth as much as they owe on them or something along those lines. Basically referencing the automotive manufacturing crash that really harmed Detroit massively.
Yep. And the neighbor, kind of mentions like, "Oh, you should consider putting your house up for sale." And Frank just says, "I'm not going anywhere," and goes back inside. We see a shot of him, this shot of this long, long hallway and him standing in front of the door that leads to the basement. He opens the door and you hear a woman screaming for help. He closes the door. And then smash cut.
Wow. Yeah. Yep.
Because that's all we needed to know.
No, and now we know. Well, we don't know everything, but we know a lot now.
Yeah.
We know that somebody has been raising some kind of a brood down in that basement. And it is gotten a little out of hand.
Just a little bit.
But also, I mean, like, Frank looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s back in what would have been at least the early 80s.
Yeah.
So he would be very old in modern time. This movie takes place in like 2019, 2021, somewhere in that neighborhood. So wonder what we'll find out about Frank as we continue. But now we know that Frank is raising babies down there. And is this a good spot for you to talk about the real world horrors that this is probably loosely based on?
I believe so. So, when we were watching the movie, I was struck because there is a true crime case that is eerily similar to this, and it's called the Fritzl case. It emerged in 2008, which is not too long ago.
Not long ago at all.
Which makes it even scarier that this was so modern.
But it was in Austria.
So we're good as long as you don't go to Austria. There's a lot of weird cases like this that happen in Austria.
Austria and Germany, man.
I just want to know what's going on over there.
I don't want to know. I'm happy
You're
all
right.
the way over here.
You're right. So what had happened is a man named Joseph Fritzl had been building basically an underground bunker unbeknownst to anyone in his family. And when his daughter Elizabeth was 18 years old, he'd asked her to come down to the basement because he needed help with something. And he locked her in the basement in a very, very creepy and very similar to this underground bunker that he had hand-built himself that was full of all these little dead drops and all these little rooms. He'd even built a room that was like a kitchen.
A fully functional kitchen.
Like a fully functional kitchen. He trapped his 18-year-old daughter down there, and he told his wife that his daughter ran away.
Yes.
And then immediately he started taking sexual advantage of his daughter. And they started having babies. Their first baby died. And what happened with that baby is, according to him, he tried to cremate it. According to other people, he just threw it into a burn pile and just burned it.
And to because this is pretty gruesome and not necessarily about the movie. He had many children with his daughter down there, and they were forced to live down there. Now, this is the part that's going to make your jaw friggin' drop.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, he got caught because one of his kids down there got so sick, he had to take them to the hospital. The kid was 18 or 19 years old. So he was doing that for almost 30 years.
Yeah, 24 years.
And that's the part that is jaw-dropping. But what's even more jaw-dropping, we'll have to discuss after we get back from this commercial break. And we are back, getting close to the truly thrilling conclusion of Barbarian. And there is so much to unpack in this film. And I want to mention again, this was your idea. This was the one you wanted to cover. And I'm so happy that we've been talking about it, because I've learned things about what I think of the movie just sitting here and talking to you about it.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to take the lead, or what's next, kid?
Well, we were talking about the Fritzl case.
Oh,
and
yes.
The similarities therein.
And like his wife didn't know.
No.
Or at least denied it heavily.
Because he forced his daughter to write several letters that he would take to the police, where she would basically say, like, yeah, I just couldn't deal with it, I ran away. And of the 6 surviving children that he would have, again, with his daughter.
Right.
3 of them, he put them on the doorstep of his family home, claiming that his daughter just dropped them off and now they've got to take care of them. So his wife raised basically her grandchildren, not really knowing the true horror that was going on.
Yeah.
And then, 2008, one of his basement children got severely ill. So, he had to take her to the hospital, and the hospital was saying, like, this child is so malnourished and underdeveloped, we need to speak to her mother. That's where he finally brought his daughter Elizabeth up, and eventually it came to light what had happened. But that true story is so very similar to the backstory of Barbarian that I wanted to touch on it.
Yes,
that
absolutely.
They didn't have to massage the truth at all, because this actually happened.
Yeah.
And not that long ago.
No, not long ago at all. And so now we've got, Justin Long is in the cavern, and he's going to find Frank.
Eventually, yeah.
I mean, I know we're jumping ahead a bit, but I mean, we have talked a lot about a lot.
Yeah, we can afford to.
So he finds Frank, and is this also at the time when Tess has escaped?
Yeah, Tess, she grabs the knife, she makes a break for it, and it's all kind of, again, smash cut the movie.
Mm-hmm.
We smash to Tess, we smash to AJ, we smash to Tess as she's getting away. And he's going further in, and he finds another door as the monster's hunting him. He gets in there, and there's an old man.
A truly decrepitly old man.
Who's clearly locked himself into this room.
Yes.
And what's striking is, there's some decorations here and there. There's a lot of beer bottles and beer cans strewn about, but there's a wall of VHS tapes.
With things like Redhead at Gas Station written on them.
And women's names.
Well, Redhead at Gas Station is, I mean, if you're a monster, that could be the woman's name. Yeah. Oof.
So, Tess is doing her own thing.
Right.
She's trying to get the police to help.
Well, she gets to the basement, the unfinished basement, breaks the window, crawls out, and then the homeless man that was chasing her snatches her, pulls her away from the scary hag who's trying to grab her, and we realize that's why he was screaming, "Don't go in that house. Hey, little girl, don't go in that house." He knew because he's lived there for 15 years.
And he's not only lived there for 15 years, but he's figured out how to survive her.
Yes. And he mentioned something very chilling that'll be poignant later, which is she comes out at night.
Mm-hmm.
But during the day, she doesn't.
Yes.
So, yeah. So then she calls the police. She looks like a crackhead, sounds like a crackhead, has no ID, has no nothing. And they just dismiss her outright.
Yeah.
And then we go back inside where AJ is getting acquainted to Frank by watching one of his VHS tapes, which we do not see.
Mm-hmm. But we see AJ's reaction and how absolutely mortified he is.
And shaken to his core.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just crying, going, "What the fuck is wrong with you?"
Yeah.
Like, that's all he can say is, what's wrong with you?
And Frank doesn't give an answer. He pulls a gun out of his drawer and blows his own brains out.
Yeah. And AJ thought he was going to shoot him for insulting him, but no, he shoots himself in front of AJ, leaving AJ even more terrified.
Mm-hmm. So, and I've got to go through my notes because, again, there's so much that just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth.
It's so thick. Well, so now this young woman will not go with the homeless gentleman to safety because she knows that AJ's in there, even though she doesn't know who he is at all, has no idea anything about him other than the fact that he's also trapped in there. She has to go back to save him, which is, again, a testament to her unbelievably large heart.
Yeah. So, what Tess does after the police leave, because it's starting to get dark now.
Yes.
So Tess gets in her car, and at first you think that she's going to drive away, but no, she just positions the car so that she's right in front of the house. And when the hag bursts through the front door, she revs it.
Yes.
And traps the hag, and then runs down in there to try and help AJ, because she can't, again, she's got a huge heart, so she can't just leave him down there.
And she knows what goes on down there.
So
she even more so does not want to leave him there. Yeah.
Because that's a death sentence.
I feel like if you're lucky, you die down there. That's that whole thing. Like, they don't kill you, they keep you.
Yeah. AJ does take the gun and he runs. As Tess is down in the tunnel, she sees a light. And before she can really register what's going on, it's AJ, and he accidentally shoots her.
Yes. And he gets her like in the lower abdomen area. So
non-lethal.
It could be lethal though.
With time.
It's not something you can just, wrap a bandage around and call it a evening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they get out of the house, and suddenly the hag is not dead at the car. She's just gone. And so Tess knows exactly where to go, because the homeless man told her where he hides
down
to stay safe.
Down by the water tower.
Down by the water tower. So they go down to the water tower. The homeless man takes him around the fire. He takes him to an area that's probably in the tower, because it's looked like they're...
it's like a little warehouse.
Yeah, they're surrounded by cement. And the homeless man kind of explains a little bit more. He says, this man Frank would take women down there. He'd have his way with them, and then they'd have babies, and then he'd have his way with the babies.
And he'd have babies with babies. And the way he said it was like making a copy of a copy of a copy.
And that's what you get.
They end up not right.
And AJ wants to immediately take Tess to the hospital, and the homeless man says, no, it's not safe. We'll wait for the day. because she doesn't come out during the day, and then we can take her in town. And they kind of ask, like, well, how do you know we're safe here? And he just kind of shrugs it off and says, well, I've been living here for 15 years and she's never gotten me here. Immediately,
She punches through the wall.
punches
and
through
attacks
the
him.
wall and kills the homeless man.
And I got to say, that was probably the most predictable part of the entire movie.
Yeah.
The movie's not very predictable, but when he was saying that, I was like, she's going to do it like
She's
right
gonna
when he
do
says
the
that.
thing. She's going to do the thing. So then AJ and Tess try and run away. They run to the top of the water tower.
And I want to mention, AJ has been up until this point obsessed with the idea of getting Tess to a doctor because he feels responsible. Obviously, he shot her, even though it was an accident. He feels responsible for her because she's hurt.
Exactly.
Just worth mentioning, because his opinions and thoughts and priorities shift quite a bit depending on which way the wind is blowing. And yeah, so they go up the water tower.
They go up the water tower. And I think it was interesting just to, again, because I had mentioned a little bit of AJ's character development through the movie. He does have a moment when they're sitting there talking with the homeless man, because he's just watched, we can only assume that it's a snuff film or something similar that he just watched. And you can see in his face that there was recognition of he could have been that. Because he had said every story has two sides. Maybe this is how the actress who is making accusations about him, maybe this is how she felt. And he even says, am I a bad person or am I just a good person who did one bad thing?
Well, he's not talking about the sexual. Well, he is, but he's not. He's talking about accidentally shooting Tess.
Yes.
But he's actually talking about maybe everything he's ever done or decided in his entire life. Because I really believe that the theme of this film is compartmentalization.
Yes.
And that's what he says. He's like, am I a bad person? And he's saying is shot Tess, but in reality, he's referring to very likely what he did to this poor woman in Los Angeles. And I agree, like, powerful stuff.
Oh, yeah. So, they get to the top of the water tower. The hag
will not relent.
Is
not
still
even a little
chasing
bit.
them because she wants her babies back.
Yeah,
That's
well,
the
especially
thing.
Tess. She really wants Tess back.
She really wants Tess back.
Because Tess was just doing what she wanted and being her baby.
And there was something that happened that I wanted to mention, but
No, please.
When the hag is chasing AJ and eventually catches him and is trying to breastfeed him.
Yes.
And it's kind of interesting, the parallel between her holding him down and holding his face and grabbing his throat. And all he needed was a little bit of convincing. And he started breastfeeding, which again goes back to his character development. But when they're on the tower, Tess obviously being injured, she can't run as fast. She can't get away. And AJ says, like, I need you to buy me time.
Yeah, he says, like, I can get away. I can get away. Because at first it was all about us. And then he's like, I can get away. I just need you to slow her down.
Yeah.
And then he makes a decision that is jaw-dropping, which is he throws Tess over the side of the water tower. But in another shocking turn of events, because boy, this movie does not mind stacking shocks, as Tess is falling, we see the hag leap off the water tower after her. And when they crash land, the hag took the brunt of the fall so that Tess would land on top of her. Which then allows AJ to try to be the hero again and be like, I'll help you, Tess. I had no choice in the matter.
I didn't even push you. You fell. You slipped.
Like, no,
and he starts compartmentalizing again.
As he's telling her what happened, what just happened, it's being rewritten live as it's coming out of his mouth. I didn't mean to, like, I mean, it was the only way I could get away at the time and I didn't want to, but I had to. And I didn't even let go. Like, your hand slipped out of my hand and I wasn't even trying to do that. And all of a sudden it's like, you started this sentence with that you did it on purpose because you had to, and it ended with you didn't even mean to.
Yep.
And that's where I think something really important comes up. He, believes the story that benefits him in every scenario. Have an interaction with a woman that was probably sexual assault. Maybe it wasn't. Buy a house in the middle of a bad neighborhood. Well, whatever. This house will be nice. Find catacombs that are clearly dangerous under your home. I could have more square footage to market. Try to sacrifice somebody to save your own life. Well, I'm so glad you're okay. I'm going to save you. He even says like, I'm a hero. He is so all about himself and the narrative that comforts him.
Yes.
And everything is painted with compartmentalization and denial. Everything. Down to us literally watching him rework the details as he's saying them out loud to make it that he's saving Tess and would never have hurt her and it was an accident anyway.
Yeah.
He is such a dire narcissist. He is beyond reproach. And I would love to hear your thought on that, because I just kind of nuts.
You took the words right out of my mouth, because that's kind of the thing. The reason his character is so memorable to me is because there is development, but there's no actual growth. And that's why I say that his character development is interesting, because you start to peel back the layers, but each layer is just more and more denial and more and more narcissism and more like he's the victim and it's all about him. And you realize like there is no growth for someone like this, which is pretty interesting because, hey, guess what? The hag still isn't dead.
And she attacks him, gouges his eyeballs out, and then tears his head in half.
Yep. And then, as if that wasn't enough, then she turns to Tess and starts trying to comfort her like a little baby and makes like little cooing noises. Ma, ba, ba. And starts caressing her face and gets really, really upset when she sees the open wound on Tess's side.
And then wants to take her home, because to her, home is the only safe place there is.
Home is safe. So Tess, she goes along with it just a little bit, but only enough to keep the hag distracted so that she can get the gun and then just blows the hag away.
Yeah.
And it's really cool because as the credits are rolling, Tess is walking through this dilapidated neighborhood and she's not well at all.
Not even a little bit, I would say.
And the sun is just barely cresting the sky. And so it's kind of this thing like, not only has she reached safety because she's killed the monster, she's also safe because now it's daylight.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, again, beautiful storytelling, visual storytelling throughout, but that was just a great way to end the movie, is just like, you know that Tess survives in some capacity. Is she okay now? No, but that's the end of the story.
Yeah, no, that's not what the story's about. The story is about she got through it, and in the end, overall, AJ died because he did not face reality of any situation ever. He faced a convenient reality. Just like when he painted over the door lock in the friggin' basement. Just like when he, bought this house and hoped it would make him a ton of money. Just like when he hurt that woman deeply and then denied that he had a part in it. Yeah. He is just a nightmare.
Yeah.
I still don't know why the film is called Barbarian, by the way. But I love it.
Well, I think part of it was they're on Barbary Avenue.
All right, now I'm tired of you. You've overstayed your welcome. That could be. No, that could be. So, but you have anything else you want to say about the film Barbarian, which, by the way, if you've listened to all of this and you want to rewatch it, I pray you haven't not watched it already, because we do spoil, and we warn you we spoil, but it is available to watch on Max right now.
No, I just think that this is a fun one. and a lot easier to get through than funny games.
Yeah, I've had dental surgery that was easier to get through than funny games.
So yeah, this one I would say like just watch it because it is creepy. It is a good time. There's a lot of good character development, a lot of good visual storytelling, and it's overall fun. I would say it's a fun ride.
I would say it's a fun ride overall, even if it's a bit painful.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot of serious stuff in it, which is one of the reasons we brought it here, and it has a lot of subtext, or at least a lot of space for us to imagine subtext and gaslight our own audience.
Which is the fun part.
Which is always the fun part. And real quick, before we get out of here, and we'll be back in a week or two. You know, we try to do the show at least twice a month, but we're still new. I want to say a special thanks to Christy Gordon over on Patreon. She has been writing in to most of the episodes we've done. She wrote me a really nice thought out letter about possession. I would read it on the air, but you have not seen Possession, so I don't think your input would be helpful. I think it would just confuse you further, as if Possession wouldn't confuse you enough. But we're going to wrap it up right now. Thank you so much for tuning in to Cutting Deep into Horror. I've been Enrique Couto here with Rachel Rodolfi. Oh, I see. You want to say your own name. But I want to thank you for listening so much, and I want to remind you, if you want to support what we're doing here, head over to weeklyspooky.com and click on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can make sure we bring all kinds of content like this to the light. And especially, I want to thank our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay just a little bit more to hear their names on the show, and they are Johnny Nix, Bobbletopia.com, Megan Hua, Julia Kirsch, Brent McCullough, Steve King, Karen Wiemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. Thank you all so much, and thank you to our executive producer, Rob Fields, our producer, Dan Wilder, and the composer of our theme song, Ray Mattis. We'll see you all next time right here on Cutting Deep into Horror, and until then, make sure you properly calculate your square footage. Good night, everybody.